Hello fashion lovers, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be taking you through the process of sewing the basic bodies. And if you're yet to watch the drafting process, you can head on to my channel to check it out. So let's get right into the video. First, we get our fabric and fold it into two. Then we place our pattern paper on the fabric, making sure that it is on fold. Then we go ahead to pin that down and also pin the pattern down to prevent it from moving while we transfer the necessary allowance. When we are done with that, we're going to add 1 inch allowance on the side seam of the pattern, and when we get towards the armhole, we're going to make use of 0.5 inches allowance, on the shoulder 0.5 inches allowance, and on the neckline 0.5 inches allowance. So we're going to connect that as shown. On the length of our dress, we'll be marking out 2 inches of hem allowance, and then we'll connect it using our straight ruler. The next thing we have to do is to transfer our dart. So basically we are going to be using a pin to transfer our dart. So we're placing our pin from this edge here, from the one part of the dart line, and then marking that down. We'll do the same thing on the other side of the dart line. So basically we are placing our pin on each of the dart line and then marking it as shown. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the bust dart. We'll be placing our pin and then transferring our dart. And then we are going to extend the dart leg like so that we'll be able to get it perfectly when we cut through our pattern. The next thing we have to do is to cut through our same allowances that we added on our fabric. We cut it through like so. After cutting through the pattern, we are going to proceed to take out our pins, and then we'll mark out the dot line in which we transferred earlier using our straight ruler. We've gone ahead to add our seam allowances on the back pattern, so basically just cut through the seam allowance line. Next, we'll be transferring our darts. We have gone ahead to do that. So the next thing is to cut the facing. So we're basically going to place our fabric on fold, and then we'll place our front pattern. Then determine the width of the facing we'll be working with. For me, I'll be making use of a short facing. So I'm going to cut through the neckline, the shoulder line, and a little bit on the armhole line. Then from the neck width, I'll be marking 4 inches downward. So I'll just notch that down and take off my pattern, then use my hand to connect from the point that I want my facing to stop. That's basically for the front face. For the back facing, we'll place our fabric on fold and cut through the neckline, the shoulder line, and then from the neck width, we're going to go down by 6 inches. Using our front facing, we are going to determine where we will stop our back facing curve. So you're basically going to just move that down and then mark at that point. Taking off the back pattern, we are going to connect that like so, and then use our scissors to cut through the necessary lines. That's basically all for the back facings. So head over to the machine to sew in our darts. So we're going to be starting with the front pattern. Now for us to be able to sew this, we're going to take out the pins on our fabric, and then we'll open that up like so. Then this midline here, we're going to basically just pinch on that midline, opening up the fabric like this. So basically this is how we are going to do it. So we'll be sewing from this point here down to this point. Ensure you straighten the fabric before stitching the dart to prevent us from having a bulge edge. We'll be starting with a back stitch, and then we'll run through the lines of our dart. Then when we get to the end of it, we're also going to run a back stitch. So done with this, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the side dart. So we're basically pinching on the middle line of the dart, this line here. So you're pinching like this and like this, flipping it this way and then placing it like this. You can go ahead to use a pin to secure this down if you like, and then you make sure that each of this line are tallying before you sew. We are going to start with a back stitch and then we run through that line. When we get to the end, we also do a back stitch. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side of the dart. We'll go ahead and sew the dart of the back pattern too. So we're basically just following the same process we used in sewing the front dart. We're going to do the same thing for the back dart. Next, we'll go ahead to fix the facing. Now, when we want to fix the facing, we will not be fixing it on the wrong side. No, instead, we'll be fixing the facing on the right side. So we'll flip it to the right side and then we'll place the facing on the neckline like so. So what we're going to do is to get our pin to hold this down. After holding this down, we are going to be using our hemming gum to sew on that line. So we'll be sewing by 0.5 inches. So basically we are going to place our hemming gum and then sew on 0.5 inches. This hemming gum helps to make our pattern relax properly when we go to our ironing board to iron. So we don't necessarily have to start fixing our hemming gum to iron, but when we sew it together like this, it will give it a very clean finish. Next, we'll be notching through that line using our scissors so that our seam is going to relax when we also iron. After which, you can go ahead to trim off the excess. The next thing we'll be doing is to top stitch. So for us to be able to top stitch, we're flipping our facing like this. So our rough edge will be facing this way, while our facing will be facing this way. So we are top stitching on the facing and not on the main fabric. We are top stitching on the facing, slightly close to the main fabric, but your stitch should be on the facing. Once we're done with the top stitching, the next thing we have to do is to iron that down. So we are going to go over to our ironing board to iron that seam down. So go ahead to iron the neckline. We'll also be ironing the darts, the bust darts, and also we'll flip the fabric over to the front side and also iron the darts so that we can have a clean finish. We head over to the back fabric and also iron through the dart. We'll flip it to the front side, we'll iron through that too. On the back fabric, we'll be marking out our zipper allowance. We made use of 1.5 inches, so basically just mark out the 1.5 inches. After marking that down, we'll be connecting it using our straight ruler and also our curve ruler to give it the silhouette of our body. Okay. After marking that down, we'll go over to our waistline and then we'll mark out 8.5 inches. You can go ahead and use 9, 10, or 11 depending on your butt. But for me, I'll be making use of 8.5 inches from the waistline. Then on the hemline, remember we made use of 2 inches. We're going to mark out that way because we'll be folding by 2 inches. And then from that point, we'll be determining how open we want our slits to be. For my case, I'll be making use of 4.5 inches, and on my machine I'll be sewing from this point to this point, or I will just run down to this point. So I've gone ahead to run down through this point. The next thing is to open the seam and press it open. So you're basically just opening the seam like so, pressing that down. After which we are going to loosen from the neck of the back down to where we want our zipper to stop like this. Okay, we'll be back stitching on this point to prevent the stitches from loosening. So I'm gonna head to do that. Next, we are going to flip it like so. You see this crease line here? That is where we'll be fixing our zipper. All right. We'll be basically fixing our zipper this way. We want our zipper to be facing upward like so. So we're placing this part like this, placing it downward like this so that this upper part will be showing up as you can see like this. So we are fixing on this side like this. So we'll open up our zipper. This stopper here, we'll be fixing it on the neckline. So this is what I like to do. On the neckline, I'll be marking out half inches all round. So I'll just go ahead and mark out half inches all round. Next is to get our zipper and then we'll be placing the stopper on that point there. That half inches, we'll take it towards that line like so. So make sure that you are placing it on the crease line of your zipper allowance before pinning it down. You can see. So place it on your zipper line, that crease line there, before pinning it down. I've gone ahead to pin that down. The next thing is to sew on that line. So basically just sew towards the zipper teeth, not on the zipper teeth. If you have a zipper foot, you can go ahead and use that. My machine already comes with a zipper foot. So I just adjust it to the zipper foot and sew slightly close to the teeth of the zip, not on it, but slightly close towards it so that we can have a clean finish when we are done sewing. Get to the down part, we'll just flip our fabric this way and then making sure that there is no other fabric underneath it. Then on the zipper, we'll just basically open that up like totally and then we sew on that line, making sure that everything is laying flat before sewing. Then you back stitch. Ensure to always cut off the excess thread so as to have a clean finish. All of these things are very necessary. We'll move over to the other side of the zipper allowance. We're going to fix in our zip like so, and then we're going to hold that down. But before we hold that down, we'll do the same thing that we did for the other side. We're basically marking out half an inches on the neckline of the back pattern. After marking that as so, we will get our zipper. We're going to place it like so, making sure that the stopper is stopping on that zero 0.5 inches line before pinning it down. Then we'll go over to the lower part, which is where the zipper is stopping, to pin that down. So basically, we are pinning it on the crease line. Do not forget, on the crease line. You don't want to go below it, you don't want to go above the crease line. It should be on the crease line. We'll go ahead to sew that down as shown. So basically, after sewing to this point, we're just going to go and open up our zipper like this. Then we'll flip it this way so that we can be able to sew on the crease line properly without any interruption or obstruction. Let's call it that. Now we have gone ahead to do that. The next thing is to fix the facing. We'll open up our zipper and then flipping it this way. We'll be fixing by zero 0.5 inches. So we'll place our facing on the neckline and sewing by zero 0.5 inches. Do not forget to always add your hemming gum while sewing. Okay? We'll go ahead to notch those area of the neckline and then trim off the excess. Next thing is to top stitch on that line. Make sure that you're top stitching on your facing. Do not forget to trim off the excess inside to prevent it from having this bulge on the neckline. Next is to sew the other side. For us to sew this side, we are going to bend our fabric like this, making sure that we have a crease, and then we'll flip it back to the wrong side of the fabric like so. Holding that point down, we are going to stitch slightly close on the zipper like this. So we are basically stitching on the zipper line but not too close to the teeth, this point here. Next, we're going to use our scissors to cut in a triangular form, or will I call it, yes, a triangular form. We're going to cut off that excess there to prevent it from bulging. So we'll flip this inside out and we have a perfect neckline curve. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side of the neckline. Now we are done with that. The next thing is to join our shoulders together. So basically we are placing front side facing front side like so. So on the shoulder towards the neckline here, we'll be placing our facing like so. So we'll open up our front facing like this, then flipping it over to the back like this. So making sure that we are placing it on the crease line of that iron, because when you iron, you have a line there. So we are flipping our facing to the other side, making sure that we are holding the four of the fabric. Okay, we are holding all four of the shoulders together before pinning them down. So you always cross check, making sure that they are aligned before pinning them down. After pinning them down, the next thing is to sew by half an inch, that is 0.5 inches. So basically just mark 0.5 inches, then we sew on that line. So as we sew, we take out our pins so that we will not end up breaking our needle. So we'll notch on the neckline curve, and then we can also trim a little bit of the excess, not everything, just trim off the excess, and we flip it that way. So we, over here we have a clean finish on the back and also a clean finish at the front. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side of the shoulder. So I'll just run you through it again. So basically what you're doing is to flip your facing on the other side like this, then securing it down with a pin like this. So you hold four of the shoulders together. So we are having four, which is the facing and the main fabric. We are holding four of them together, pin them down, and sew by 0.5 inches. So when we are done sewing on 0.5 inches, we trim off that edge and also trim off a little bit of the excess. And on the side seam, we have gone ahead to pin that down. So we are basically sewing by 1 inches. So we are sewing by the allowance we added. You can go ahead to mark your 1 inch seam allowances before sewing. But for me, most times I prefer using this method because I feel like it's faster. As I mark, I sew, but you can go ahead to mark it down before sewing. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. The next thing is to iron all the seams we have made so far. So basically just iron the side seam. We'll also go ahead to iron the shoulder seam. The next thing we have to do is to hem. So we're basically marking out 2 inches that we added initially to the length of our dress. After marking that down, we'll go ahead and fold it like so and iron that down. So for us to be able to properly hem our dress, we'll go over to this point here. So we're marking where the 2 inches hem stop and where the 1.5 inches zipper allowance stop. So you just mark it like so as you see me do. The next thing is to open that up and then hold those 2 points together, flipping it like so and using a pin to secure that down. Okay, for a better understanding, I'll be marking 3 points. So look at what I'm doing. After you have marked out the 2.5 and 1 inches on the zipper crease line, we'll mark that point. So we have 3 points. So we'll place the first 2 points like this, pinning them down like this. Okay, so you can go ahead to secure that down using your pin. After securing that down, we'll go and use our chalk to mark out that line towards where we marked the third line. So we're marking that with a straight line before we go ahead to sew. Before cutting off the excess, we'll have to cross check what we have done. So you just flip it in and check if everything is laying flat. If you're okay with it, you can go ahead and trim off the excess. On the other side, we'll go ahead and do the same thing. We'll mark out the 1.5 inches and 2 inches where our zipper and our hemline stop and also the crease line. We'll connect those 1.5 and 2 inches like this using a pin, flip it this way. Then we'll go ahead and use our chalk to connect that to the point, the third mark that we did earlier. We'll mark that like this and sew it down. Okay. You can go ahead and check if you are okay with the outcome. If you are, you can trim off the excess. The next thing is to hem. So I prefer hemming with my hemming gum. You can use your sewing machine if you want, but for my case, I'll be using a hemming gum. In my next video, I'll be showing you how to draft a basic sleeve and also how to properly fix your basic sleeve to your basic bodice. And if you have not yet joined my sewing family, you can go ahead and hit on the subscribe button so you become a member of my sewing family and you will get notified when I upload new videos. Thank you for watching. See you in my next tutorial.